Hey, how you doing, Eddie?
I'm great.
Hey, I had a question about Steel Panther. I have really kind of turned into kind of a big fan. I like their music.
Boy, I tell you what, if he doesn't know Satchel's voice, oh.
Eddie Trunk called them a joke. So Steel Panther turned him into the punchline and rock fans lost their minds. Eddie Trunk has always been a towering figure in rock and metal circles, a voice that fans trust to separate authenticity from pretense. And when Eddie Trunk called Steel Panther a joke, it sent shockwaves that rippled across the community. For decades, Eddie Trunk has built his reputation on knowledge, credibility, and a deep understanding of the music that defined generations. But in that single comment, he inadvertently stepped into a trap set by the band itself, a trap designed to turn criticism into spectacle. Steel Panther, composed of Michael Starr, Satchel Lexi Fox, and Styx Zedinia, thrives on exaggeration, parody, and unapologetic excess, a living embodiment of the glam metal era amplified to absurdity. And to dismiss them as a joke is to misunderstand the very point of their artistry. The band is never hidden behind the joke. The joke is the foundation, the lens through which they channel their musical skill, stage presence, and theatricality. Eddie Trunk, a guardian of rock orthodoxy, approached them from a place of authority, assuming that credibility is measured by seriousness, not humor, and that satire somehow diminishes musicianship. But Steel Panther operates under a different philosophy. The louder, more ridiculous, more outrageous the persona, the more powerful the performance. That clash of philosophy is where the tension begins, because when a critic of Eddie Trunk's stature speaks, it carries weight. And when Steel Panther hears that, they do not retreat. They amplify, they exaggerate, and they turn the commentary into content. What Eddie Trunk intended as dismissal became raw material, and Steel Panther transformed it into narrative, using the very criticism as a catalyst to reinforce their identity. The brilliance lies in their ability to let the audience participate in the joke, to watch the interplay between critic and performer, and to realize that the line between mockery and mastery is intentionally blurred. Fans immediately noticed the collision, debating whether Eddie Trunk was correct or whether Steel Panther's performance elevated them above critique by proving that humor and musicianship are not mutually exclusive. Michael Starr's vocals, Satchel's guitar riffs, Lexi Fox's bass lines, and Styx Zedinia's drumming form a precise, polished core, yet the band wraps it in layers of theatrics, costume, and exaggerated egos, a package that challenges purest definitions of legitimacy. Eddie Trunk's comment ignored that duality, and by doing so he unwittingly handed Steel Panther a weapon, the authority of criticism itself. They allowed the remark to float in public discourse, unchallenged, at first creating anticipation and speculation, because anticipation is part of the joke, and speculation amplifies engagement. Once fans filled in the blanks, memes, discussions, and debates emerged, positioning Eddie Trunk as a character within the narrative he did not intend to join. Steel Panther's response was never about personal attack, but about turning Gate into performance art, exposing how easily authority becomes fodder when confronted with exaggeration and laughter. Their approach is calculated. They never overreact. They rarely respond directly. Instead, they let implication work, letting the audience connect the dots, letting social media amplify the story until Eddie Trunk, the critic, becomes part of the performance. This is the genius of Steel Panther. They weaponize ridicule, not defensiveness, and in doing so, they maintain control while drawing attention, conversation, and engagement. Eddie Trunk represents preservation, rules, and seriousness. The Steel Panther represents chaos, freedom, and irreverence. And when those forces collide, spectacle is inevitable. The moment captured the cultural tension between reverence and provocation, and fans reacted instantly, some defending Eddie Trunk, others celebrating Steel Panther's audacity. The more Eddie Trunk tried to explain, clarify, or contextualize his comment, the more the band's strategy succeeded, because explanation invites satire, and satire thrives on seriousness. By refusing to argue, Steel Panther allowed the criticism to inflate, absorb attention, and fold back on the critic himself, and the audience watched in fascination as the dynamics unfolded. Steel Panther did not destroy Eddie Trunk's credibility, but they reframed him, illustrating how influence and authority can be manipulated in modern media landscapes. The band's understanding of timing, audience psychology, and social amplification transformed what could have been a fleeting insult into a cultural moment, demonstrating that narrative control does not require confrontation, only strategy and awareness. Fans began questioning what counts as legitimacy, whether humor diminishes artistry, and whether critics who defend tradition understand the changing nature of performance. All while Steel Panther continued performing, selling tickets, and reinforcing their image as audacious provocateurs. In essence, Eddie Trunk became a symbol, intentionally or not, a representation of gatekeeping itself, while Steel Panther exemplified rebellion and irreverence, and the clash became more than commentary. It became a lesson in media literacy, audience behavior, and the dynamics of attention. By the time the conversation peaked, memes, articles, podcasts, and fan debates positioned Eddie Trunk as part of the spectacle, illustrating a critical lesson. In a world where narrative spreads faster than facts, laughter can outweigh authority, engagement can outweigh explanation, and boldness can outweigh preservation. Steel Panther's victory was subtle yet complete. They never needed to respond directly, never needed to justify themselves, and yet they controlled the cultural frame, demonstrating how skillful artists manipulate context to convert criticism into promotion, turning the critic into part of the story, and ensuring that fans remain captivated, discussing, sharing, and returning for more. The moment illuminated the tension between classic rock sensibilities and contemporary performance art, between reverence for legacy and enthusiasm for absurdity, and it revealed a truth many overlook, that audience attention is the ultimate currency, and those who understand how to leverage it, even through ridicule, control perception. Eddie Trunk, despite his decades of influence, became evidence of that principle because Steel Panther demonstrated that criticism does not always diminish. It can enhance, if the target knows how to wield the narrative. And fans responded with fervor, creating a feedback loop where engagement, humor, and spectacle fed each other continuously. This is where the story becomes fascinating. It is not merely a feud. It is an illustration of power dynamics in entertainment culture, showing how performers who understand narrative and audience psychology can turn even authoritative condemnation into opportunity. Steel Panther's approach was not chaotic, was deliberate, strategic, and perfectly timed. They allowed Eddie Trunk's words to circulate, letting audience curiosity magnify them, turning the critic into a character within the performance, reinforcing the band's identity as fearless, outrageous, and untouchable within the world they created. By embracing the label of joke, they transformed it into armor, into branding, and into an invitation for fans to participate, witness, and amplify the spectacle, proving that modern success in music depends as much on perception and narrative as on musical skill, and that authority, when too rigid, can become a vulnerability if it fails to account for performative intelligence, audience behavior, and media dynamics. Steel Panther absorbed Eddie Trunk's criticism, turned it into mythology, and continued building their legend, reminding the world that audacity, humor, and self-awareness can turn even apparent insults into instruments of triumph, and that those who attempt to define legitimacy from a pedestal may find themselves consumed by the very spectacle they aim to judge. In that clash, Eddie Trunk's authority met the unpredictable genius of Steel Panther, and the result was a cultural moment, a story of strategy, narrative control, and the enduring power of entertainment, amplified by irony, boldness, and calculated direct. Responded after Steel Panther's implicit assault on his credibility, but his response only reinforced the band's strategy because in trying to clarify, justify, and defend, he inadvertently became part of the narrative they had crafted. Steel Panther's genius is that they do not need to attack directly. They manipulate perception, allowing audiences to interpret, amplify, and discuss, turning the critic into a character within their performance. When Eddie Trunk tried to explain himself on podcasts, interviews, and social media, his words spread, dissected, and analyzed, giving Steel Panther further attention without lifting a finger. The band's philosophy is built around provocation and spectacle, not validation, and Eddie Trunk's attempt to reclaim authority only fueled the spectacle. Michael Starr, with his theatrical vocals and exaggerated persona, embodies the essence of the joke, while Satchel's guitar virtuosity, Lexi Fox's commanding bass, and Styx Zedinia's precise drumming form the backbone of real musical skill underneath layers of parody. That duality, the mix of undeniable talent and flamboyant absurdity, is what Eddie Trunk misread. And misreading it meant he underestimated how audience psychology would play into Steel Panther's hands. Fans thrive on spectacle, controversy, and narrative tension. And when they see a critic like Eddie Trunk react, it confirms the stakes and heightens engagement. The band does not merely respond to criticism, they absorb it, twist it, and project it back amplified, creating content, memes, discussions, and endless speculation. Eddie Trunk became the lightning rod for the conversation because he represented authority, and authority is inherently fascinating when exposed to ridicule. Steel Panther, meanwhile, continued to tour, perform, and sell merchandise, each show reinforcing the identity that critics tried to dismiss. Their audience is highly participatory. Fans know the joke, understand the music, and are eager to witness the tension between rebellion and tradition unfold in real time. The more Eddie Trunk attempted to contextualize his statement, the more it fed the band's narrative because clarification invites satire, and satire thrives on seriousness. In this dynamic, the audience is the arbiter, choosing sides, debating legitimacy, and sustaining engagement, which is exactly what Steel Panther counts on. Eddie Trunk's authority did not vanish, but its perception shifted in the eyes of younger audiences who value audacity, humor, and spectacle over solemn preservation. The band transformed what could have been a fleeting insult into a lesson on narrative manipulation, audience psychology, and cultural relevance. By embracing the label of joke and leaning into exaggeration, they turned criticism into a branding tool and made the audience complicit, allowing the conversation to unfold organically across platforms. The genius of Steel Panthers, the approach is in its subtlety. They never explicitly call out critics. They let implication, performance, and context do the work. Memes, social commentary, and fan debates carry the narrative far beyond anything a direct response could achieve, creating a multi-layered participatory experience where even Eddie Trunk is aware that he is inside the joke. That awareness itself reinforces the band's control because performers who can absorb criticism without defensiveness dominate attention. The clash between Eddie Trunk and Steel Panther highlights a deeper cultural tension between preservation and provocation, between reverence for legacy and celebration of excess. Eddie Trunk represents history, rules, and authority, while Steel Panther represents freedom, humor, and the ability to push boundaries without apology. When those forces collide, engagement skyrockets, attention multiplies, and the cultural story extends far beyond music, becoming an example of modern media dynamics where narrative, perception, and audience behavior dictate influence more than technical authority ever could. Steel Panther's performances are designed to provoke exactly this kind of attention. Theatrical, outrageous, excessive, yet grounded in real musical skill, and that combination makes them impossible to dismiss without becoming part of the spectacle. Eddie Trunk's words, amplified by social media, blogs, podcasts, and fan commentary, became raw material that Steel Panther reshaped, highlighting a lesson in the power of audience psychology. Those who attempt to define legitimacy without understanding the performative context risk becoming symbols of rigidity in the face of audacity. The band's success relies on participation, and participation thrives on tension, curiosity, and humor, which Eddie Trunk unwittingly supplied. The more he reacted, the more the audience consumed, discussed, and debated. This is why Steel Panther's strategy is flawless. They never need to fight authority head-on. They redirect it, consume it, and repurpose it. Eddie Trunk remains respected, knowledgeable, and influential. But the clash revealed that authority alone cannot control perception in a world driven by spectacle, social amplification, and ironic humor. Steel Panther's response was not only about proving their worth, but also about exposing how critics and gatekeepers can be rendered secondary when they fail to account for audience participation, timing, and narrative framing. Their approach underscores a truth about modern music culture. Control of the story often outweighs control of the message. Eddie Trunk operates from preservation. Steel Panther operates from spectacle. And in the age of viral content, spectacle dominates. The story resonated, not because anyone was cancelled or defeated, but because it symbolized a fundamental shift. Humor, performance, and irony can challenge authority, reshape narrative, and redefine legitimacy. Fans stayed engaged because the dynamic was compelling. The stakes were clear, and the interplay between critic and performer was ongoing. The conflict demonstrates how a single comment, a single label, can be transformed into an enduring cultural moment when the target understands narrative, timing, and audience behavior. Steel Panther turned Eddie Trunk's authority into a lens through which audiences could explore deeper questions about authenticity, relevance, and the boundaries of rock performance. The band's mastery lies in its ability to let the audience participate, to amplify absurdity, and to transform dismissal into attention, proving that rebellion, humor, and confidence can outweigh rigid authority in determining influence. This episode is more than entertainment. It is a case study in media, narrative, and cultural engagement, revealing that in a world driven by attention, those who can manipulate perception, absorb ridicule, and control narrative timing will always have an advantage over critics clinging to authority alone. Eddie Trunk's reaction, though measured and articulate, highlights the fragility of seriousness in spaces where audacity and humor dominate. Steel Panther's performances, words, and the careful orchestration of public perception ensured that they not only survived the criticism but used it to cement their identity and amplify their reach. Fans, critics, and observers all participated in the unfolding spectacle, demonstrating that narrative mastery is a form of power as potent as technical skill. Eddie Trunk may continue to defend tradition, history, and credibility, but Steel Panther's triumph lies in demonstrating that engagement, provocation, and humor can outpace authority, creating moments that endure far beyond the initial comment. In the end, this clash proves a simple yet profound principle. In modern rock culture, laughter, audacity, and strategic exaggeration are as influential as knowledge, experience, and authority, and Steel Panther knows how to wield all three. To remain unforgettable, relevant, and untouchable, while critics like Eddie Trunk, no matter how respected, are drawn into the spectacle they did not anticipate. The story continues to circulate, be debated, and inspire fascination because it demonstrates how performers can transform potential negativity into legendary status, turning dismissive criticism into mythology and ensuring that audiences remain captivated, discussing, sharing, and returning for more long after the music stops.